Okay, thank you. So my name is Sandra Schachat. Thank you. You came so close, and it's very rare to have someone. Yes. Well, thank you. And so I have absolutely no credentials at all whatsoever. Not even a bachelor's degree, but this is something that I think it's a topic that has potentially been missing from conversations in the skeptical community. So what little I do know, I am going to share with the hopes that we'll start a dialogue, but I am not an expert. And the subject of my talk is public understanding of science and also access to science in the developing world, and I'm going to focus mostly on health. So in the skeptical media, whether it's podcasts or blogs, if we're talking about the developing world or the global south, or however you want to put it, we tend to focus on very dramatic one-time events. So I'm sure a lot of people recognize this when a tantric guru in India was going to kill a skeptic on national television with mind tricks. And luckily, that didn't work out, and it makes a great story, but that doesn't really have very much to do with people's daily lives. It was a one-time event. Also, in sub-Saharan Africa, there's a problem of children being declared witches, and very horrible things will happen to them. And also, there was one story that got a lot of attention when a couple went to Vietnam. A handbag had been stolen, and a fortune teller told them that it was their employee who had stolen the handbag, and they kept their employee hostage and tortured her. So these are very bad things, and they have to do with pseudoscience. So these are things that do deserve attention, but we're not really talking about the root causes. And so what I see as the causes of the popularity of pseudoscience that maybe especially has to do with the developing world, first of all, lack of education. We may lament the state of education in general, science education in particular, here in the United States, and not without reason, but I think that it's much worse in countries that are at lower economic levels. People may have absolutely no understanding of the scientific method, so even if you say to them, this experiment was done and these were the results, sometimes people will think that, well, there's just absolutely no way of knowing at all whatsoever. There's no way of proving yes or no on the questions of homeopathy or acupuncture, things like that. And then the overuse of antibiotics is a great example of that. There's so many places where if there's anything that's wrong with you, if anything hurts, if you have a cold, you'll get antibiotics. You can just walk down the street to the pharmacy and buy some antibiotics. And people really have no idea that antibiotics only work in certain situations. And they've been told that antibiotics are good. So if they want something good to happen, if they want to get better, they'll just use antibiotics. And poverty is a huge problem as well. Malarone, which is the best malaria treatment, is totally out of reach of the people who need it the most. You're not supposed to take it long-term to prevent malaria, but if you have malaria, it's a great treatment for it, and it isn't available to people. And I'm sure everyone knows how many people die of malaria, especially children, every year. Vanica is an even more dramatic example of that. It's a treatment for sleeping sickness, a parasitic disease that's maybe even worse than malaria. The traditional treatment for sleeping sickness could only be administered in a hospital, and most people who got sleeping sickness would live very far away. They'd have to walk for days to get to the hospital. They would need to stay in the hospital for a very long time, so it was a very big problem for their families. They couldn't take care of their families. They need family members to come with them. They couldn't afford the treatment. And then the treatment itself, the traditional sleeping sickness treatment, which is based on arsenic, did kill a significant proportion of people who sought treatment. And an anti-cancer drug that Bristol Myers was in charge of, which turned out to not work very well for cancer, was found to be a miracle cure for sleeping sickness. It was very easy to administer. It didn't even have to be given in a hospital. It was easy to store. But the people who needed it couldn't afford it. However, one of the side effects of what is now marketed as Vanica was a slight loss of hair. So Vanica is marketed to menopausal women to get rid of their mustaches. And it was, this was about 10 years ago. I don't know if anyone else remembers the commercial, but they'd have the word Vanica like going across a woman's face. Vanica, 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 Vanica. This is a life-saving treatment. Not that mustaches aren't horrible, But sleeping sickness, if you're talking about a parasitic illness that has a combination of being both very common and very deadly, sleeping sickness is about as bad as it gets. And when the pharmaceutical company, Bristol Myers Squibb, was not making all the money that they wanted to off of a treatment that had been available for a long time and wasn't too expensive to produce, they just stopped selling it in sub-Saharan Africa. And luckily, there was an article, it started out in the Progressive magazine, I think there was coverage in the New York Times, Doctors Without Borders, I think maybe 60 Minutes. There's a lot of media attention that forced Bristol Myers Squibb to donate millions of dollars worth of Vanica to people who really did need it. But without that media attention, that never would have happened. And of course, sleeping sickness is a relatively well-known disease if we're talking about things that only affect the poorest people. And also local culture. I think all local cultures have pseudoscientific beliefs, but the cultures that have been most associated with science, the scientific revolution, the scientific method, their pseudoscientific beliefs have mostly fallen by the wayside. But there are plenty of places where traditional beliefs might cause harm. There might be things that we know that shouldn't do, things that don't help, practices that are still in place because of local culture, and also colonial past. In our minds, science and colonialism might not go together, but in the minds of many people, they do. And so these are sort of the root causes, but I think that there are additional challenges that we will have to confront if we want to help people understand science and use science to make their lives better. I am using this as a joke, by the way. I don't. I know I have the onion up here, but I'm not saying that it's part of a conspiracy theory. This is just a nice example. So don't worry. I'm not saying that we should all believe the onion, especially after that last talk. But so there are these additional challenges, once again, with the traditional beliefs. There are lots of cultures where there might be some sort of pseudoscience that we'd want to address to help people improve their lives. But that can be very touchy because those same cultures might also be holding onto an endangered language. These same cultures might do a great job of conserving biodiversity, and they might have some knowledge of medicinal plants that could be very useful, that might be, we might be able to prove scientifically that those plants are helpful. So it can be very touchy to go somewhere and say, please keep speaking your endangered language. Please keep conserving this part of the rainforest because we're worried about biodiversity loss and we're worried about climate change. Please conserve your knowledge of medicinal plants in case it turns out to be something like willow bark and aspirin, and it turns out to be true, but we don't think that this is true, so stop doing this. So it can be very complex. It's not nearly as black and white as it may be here, where we can just say, okay, aspirin good, homeopathy bad. Corruption also enables distrust of science. Counterfeit medicines are a huge problem. There was a great article in Smithsonian Magazine about counterfeit malaria medications in Southeast Asia a couple of years ago. Counterfeit medicines are huge. And of course, there have been lots of campaigns to help people understand how they can tell the real thing from fake medicine, but unfortunately, it can just sort of create or foster this attitude of, well, it's so hard to tell if the medicine I'm buying is real or not. Maybe I should just skip it. And there can be horrible, horrible things in counterfeit medicines. It's not always just sugar pills. And they've been using holograms and things like that to stamp on boxes to show that medicine is the real thing, and the counterfeiters have just counterfeited the holograms as well. So it's a huge problem, and it's ongoing. And also charlatans. There are lots of people who claim to be real doctors, and not necessarily in the poorest neighborhoods. They might be in a very nice place, have a very nice house, very legitimate looking practice. And then you meet some of their former patients, and they have huge scars because that charlatan performed surgery on them, and they had no idea what they were doing. And one thing that I don't have on here, but also when you talk about public hospitals and the most economically accessible hospitals, a lot of the time you have to sleep outside the night before if you want treatment. It's impossible to get an appointment in advance. You can't see the same doctor multiple times. You'll have to wait for hours and hours and hours. So you lose a couple days of your life if you want medical treatment. And that's lost time. Those are times that you need to leave your children with neighbors. Those are times that you can't go to work and you might lose your job. So it's very difficult in so many cases for people to get access to science-based medicine or see a real doctor. Whereas the naturalist store or the acupuncturist or someone who will cure all your problems with chiropractic, with them, you just walk in, you wait 15 minutes, and they'll see you right away. And so because of this, also people will usually just go straight to pharmacies for lots of problems that we would see a doctor for. It's so much easier, it's right down the street, but there's lots of problems with pharmacies. The pharmacist, a lot of the time, will not even have a high school education. The biggest problem is maybe the economic interest. The same person who is supposed to tell you what medicine you should take to feel better is the person who will make a ton of money if they sell you an entire bottle of the most expensive medicine that they have in their pharmacy. So it's really against their interest in many cases to tell you exactly what you should be taking or how much you should be taking. And also, lots of medications that we would take in pill form are injected. That can be very painful. And of course, there's the question of needles. Are the needles clean? Will they be disposed of properly? And lastly, brain drain sort of engenders an environment of distrust of science or maybe lack of understanding of science. So that's what I have up here for anyone who can't see it. This is an article from The Onion from back in the day. India's top physicists develop plan to get the hell out of India. And it's true, if the best scientific minds are leaving the country, you're not going to have as much of a scientific culture in that country. And of course, India is actually one of the much better examples. So even though there are all these additional problems if you're trying to get people to understand science and use it to make their lives better, there are lots of potential allies that will have infrastructure on the ground in these countries. So education groups, literacy groups, children's rights groups, they obviously would have a huge interest in stopping pseudoscience, stopping practices that will potentially even kill children. Environmentalists, lots of charismatic megafauna like rhinos and tigers, they're being poached for use in woo medicine. And no matter how you may feel about agrochemicals and organic foods here in the United States, there's a huge problem with pesticide and fertilizer misuse in many countries. In the case of cotton, especially, a lot of time, these problems are perpetuated or even caused by the government. And that's an area where science education really could help a lot of people. As far as health, I'm not sure if anyone knew this. I guess we can call it Global Hand Washing Weekend because Global Hand Washing Day was yesterday. So happy post-Global Hand Washing Day. And I think that this is a great poster, and this is an image that you'll see around the world. That's something that we take for granted. I'm not sure how many people have been involved in hand-washing campaigns here in the DC area. Probably not very many. It's something we don't even think about, but it's a really great example of how science can promote health. And this is a very, very necessary campaign. It's already saved many lives, and it can save many more. It's ongoing in many parts of the world. And then, of course, there are many myths that should be busted about pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections here in the West, but in other countries it's way worse. And lastly, skeptics are often accused of shilling for big pharma because they say that you should get vaccines. In many parts of the world, skeptics would actually disagree very strongly with a lot of the practices of big pharma. So large pharmaceutical companies are making a killing off of the overuse of antibiotics, off of the unscientific use of antibiotics. And also the prices of medicine. There's absolutely no point in telling people that they should take science-based medicine if they can't afford science-based medicine. And in India, I know that the government there has done a great job of getting pharmaceutical companies to lower their prices to the point where people can't afford AIDS medication is the biggest one. But if we're going to tell people how great science is, we need them to be able to afford their science-based medicine. And so, like I said, this would be an opportunity to prove that we're not shills for big pharma. And there are other things that the skeptical movement or skeptical individuals could do on their own. Missionaries, of course, will go all over the world handing out little books of Bible stories. And those books are often treasured by the people who receive them. They're very cheaply produced units, 8.5 by 11, black and white, stapled in half, little booklets. If they were given out here, people wouldn't even take them, or they'd just throw them away right away. But they'll be cherished because people want to learn English. And I think that people also want to learn about science. So if people were to produce little booklets, like I said, they're very cheap and easy to produce. They would only have to be in English. Produce those booklets and hand them out. People would keep them in their homes for years, read them to their families, or every member of the family would read them because people do want to learn English and they would also like to learn about science. Right now, if you don't have a lot of money and you want to learn English, in so many places, the only way that you can do that is by accepting this missionary literature, which might not 100% promote science. The image that I've seen the most when I'm traveling is Jesus and Lazarus and the whole resurrection thing. I don't think that one's been proven. So this would be so easy to do, to just put these things together. Like I said, they distribute themselves. Everybody would want one, and that would be a great way to help people learn English and help people learn about science. Also, something that I haven't really seen discussed anywhere, I think there are thousands, but I didn't put it on there because I'm not sure. I know there are hundreds of lesson plans, especially for science, on the internet. Project Wet, Project Wild, all sorts of things like that. And the people who know most about these are the people who also put their lesson plans on there. So it's great for the most educated of science teachers to be able to swap ideas. But the people who could use this the most often have access to the internet. There's internet cafes everywhere. But it would never even occur to them to search for free science lesson plans online because they come from a culture where these things might not be given away for free or where the infrastructure might not be in place to share them. So if someone who is traveling abroad could, just spend half a day with a dozen teachers in a workshop showing them, look, you can use the internet for more than just Wikipedia or Facebook or MSN chat, and all of this great stuff is out there. In very little time, if you just showed teachers how to find these things on the internet, you could end up touching hundreds, or if not thousands, of lives, because good science lesson plans can be so hard to come by in many areas. And also pirated DVDs. This is something that has gotten a lot of attention in the Western media. There are so many great free videos on YouTube that skeptics have made, hoping that absolutely everyone will see them. If you burn them onto a DVD, obviously if the person who created the video and has the rights to it, not me, but if the person who put everything together would burn them onto a DVD and distribute the master to a couple capital cities, it would explode. Documentaries sell very well, and of course local people will be making money off of disseminating this information. And lots of people may distrust the West in particular, the United States especially, because of things that the government might do or economic policies or things like that. But so many people love Hollywood, so it is. And documentaries, PBS documentaries, will get pirated and will sell very well. So if we could specifically put together just a master of free videos that are already out there, if the person who makes those videos would like them to be distributed, once you get the master to a certain city, copies will be made right away and they'll be sold right away. And lastly, distance education. There are many countries where a university will have a network television channel, and they'll do distance education. So they'll have TV shows all day teaching mostly science, and you can just watch it, or you can take notes and take exams and get a degree having watched the lectures on television. And they tend towards medicine, but it's usually cell biology, molecular biology, chemistry, and things like that. So you don't see lessons on how to tell a good medical treatment from woo, or things like that, how to read a study and see if the people who funded that study led the scientists to make conclusions that actually contradict their data, which I think acupuncture is infamous for that, but there are a bunch of unscientific treatments where people will do that. So this would be a great way to connect with science educators in many countries, and I think that they would be very receptive to people explaining to them how you can teach these sorts of things, because like I said, their lessons do tend towards medicine. And so that's pretty much it. I made a Facebook group this morning if there's anyone who'd be interested in continuing to talk about this or maybe getting some of these materials in other countries. I don't have it up here. It's Developing Skepticism. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Are there any sorts of organizations that specifically put people in these other countries to do like science teacher training or to distribute pamphlets or whatever? I mean, is there any sort of like organized, like a Peace Corps type thing for this sort of helping developing countries have a better understanding of science?
Not that I am aware of, and I have been looking. I mean, I hope that there is one, and I just haven't found it. The question is whether there's some sort of organization like a skeptical version of the Peace Corps maybe that is getting people on the ground in these countries to distribute this information and to do this sort of education. From what I can tell, there's just so much demand for English teachers that trumps everything else. That if you're from a place like America or even Austria, if you're from a Western nation, whether or not it's known for having great English speakers, you get the most money, or you get the most help if you're a volunteer if you want to teach English, and that's what there's the most demand for. So I am unaware of any organization that has, I mean, does anyone know of one? I'm unaware of any organization that does this sort of work already.
My question was a little bit similar to Mary's, of like organizations like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you know, that they go in and they can distribute a medication that's needed. Do you think that has any long-term effect?
Okay, so as far as the foundations that will go in and give medications, with them having long-term effects, my answer is probably going to tell you more about my biases than anything else. But from what I can tell, the organizations, the foundations that have enough money to buy very expensive drugs and distribute them to people, they tend to be organizations that will go with the status quo. And so instead of saying, oh, this is a huge problem, no one in Botswana who has AIDS can afford AIDS medication, we need to work with the government to challenge the producers of these medications, they'll say, oh, we will just go into Botswana and buy antiretrovirals for a certain number of people for a certain number of years. So from what I can tell, they certainly have done a lot of good, these people who are going in and buying medications for people who need them. But no, they don't typically produce a lot of long-term change. And that also has to do with the debate over aid. Some people are saying that foreign aid, especially to places like Africa, is actually doing more harm than good because the way that it will be distributed can be corrupt. But also it will sort of legitimize governments that could have been tackling these problems on their own and didn't. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is actually a good example of that because they will tackle AIDS. I think they mostly focus on AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, right? And those are the most well-known diseases. And of course, those are horrible diseases, and they have done good work. But things like sleeping sickness that don't affect people in the United States and couldn't because here we're all worried about the antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis that's coming from the Russian prisons that they found in Brooklyn many, many years ago. Sleeping sickness, nobody is worried about. Sleeping sickness has never been in this country. So there are very few foundations that are even talking about those sorts of things. And yeah, the huge philanthropic foundations, they do a good job of getting medication to people, but they don't change people's attitudes.
I hate to defend somebody who brought the world Windows Vista, but I do happen to know that where they can, the Gates Foundation does do good work in a more sustainable way. Like we know that in Nepal, they did a long-term study on nutrition and helped determine that vitamin A deficiency was responsible for a lot of deaths of newborns and stuff. So that is a program that has been ongoing over the last, I don't know, at least 15 years, and I think they've done good work there, and that is a very low-cost, sustainable, has very little to do with what goes on in America. And so I think that these problems can be somewhat intractable, and therefore, people are trying to do what they can. I think that, they are probably their intent is well-intentioned, and probably not as worthy of cynicism as maybe I kind of
Me? Oh, sorry. I know that in India there is a skeptical movement. For some of the other countries, such as Uganda and Nigeria, other countries where this, the false information is a serious problem, are there grassroots skeptical groups as well, or is there a way we can, you know, as people belonging to local skeptical groups, we can encourage the growth of that?
I actually considered giving my talk on that instead of this. The question was whether there are grassroots skeptical movements in countries like Uganda and Nigeria, because yes, India is well known. They have wonderful skeptics doing amazing work there. So the question was whether there are other countries like that. So that's something that I've looked into a lot. From what I can tell, it depends in large part on the language that they speak. So in India, a lot of this material is in English, and it will feed off of English language material that will come out of countries like the United States or England. In countries like Nigeria and Uganda, where the official language might be English, but people in their daily lives will be far less likely to speak English, or they'll be far less likely to understand the material that comes out of the United States that's written in English. You find a lot less of that. And then as far as countries where they'll speak different languages, a lot of the skeptical material will be simple translations of what came out of here. Or maybe they'll join a project that started in an English-speaking country. I know that if you're to look at the material in Spanish, most of it comes from Spain and not the developing countries, or it will come from Argentina and Chile, and Mexico. So those countries are officially not third world, even if we might not think of them as rich countries. The CFI Peru website, because I was looking through the Center for Inquiry, the CFI Peru website is, I haven't checked in a long time, but last time I checked, it was a Blogspot blog with Richard Dawkins videos that were only in English. Sorry, we've had some.
Will you post the link on Facebook and Meetup later?
Yes. I'll post the link. I don't know if I can post it to the Facebook group for SkeptiCamp and the different.
Okay. All right. So yes, I'll put the link. And
there are Nigerian and Ugandan humanist movements. If you check with International Humanist Union, you can find those listed. My question is about anti-dumping laws that prevents companies in the United States from selling products at below cost to put local organizations out of business so that then they can raise the cost after there's no competition. Is that applicable to this problem of more expensive drugs?
I honestly don't know if it's applicable to the problem of more expensive drugs. The anti-dumping laws that will that make it illegal for large international corporations to sell products at very low cost to put the local businesses out of business, and then they can sell their products at whatever cost they want. I know that that's a huge problem with infant formula. I don't know. I honestly don't know if it's a problem with medicine.
I think I have the answer to the question. For drugs specifically, it's all international, intellectual property laws. So there's a patent. There's regulations, international treaties about, can you make a generic, can you sell a generic globally even though there's a bilateral trade agreement and stuff like that. But it's all intellectual property. It's not like a commodity like flour, for example, where, anyone can produce it. It's a lot
A cheap U.S. product.
No, well, with drugs specifically, what happens is there's a patent on it, right? However, it's very easy to replicate. So there are a lot of local producers of generics who are forbidden to sell that because they're infringing on a patent for an existing medication.
So I'm talking about a U.S. company being able to sell a product that they made, export it and sell it cheaply in Africa because there's nobody there that can make it.
For drugs?
Yeah, for drugs. Maybe there's nobody there that can make it. So
even a cheap, all patents expired drug would fit into
yeah, whether it's got a patent or not, then being able to sell it for less, not more.
Question?
Me? Yeah. Oh, I just want to clarify, I'm the executive director for the CFI DC branch, and I want to clarify that we do have branches all over the world. They're fairly autonomous, so they can focus on whatever they think that their needs are. If they want to focus on religion, they can focus on religion. If they want to focus more on skeptical issues, they're free to do so, whatever they feel the need in their community is.
I think that the internet is a great tool, but I wonder if the people, really need some education because there's so much woo misinformation and so much pseudoscience that's also on the web. That if you're going to, teach the teachers how to, how to get the science lesson plans, that maybe you also need to teach them how to figure out what a credible website looks like.
Yes, so I agree completely that if we're going to teach teachers how to look for lesson plans online, we should also teach them how to differentiate between credible information and woo. And just one last thing that I wanted to say in regards to the gentleman's point, there was, if you're looking for humanist groups, I know that Feringula had, was it maybe 6 months ago, would put up different secular groups, links to secular groups in all sorts of different countries. And there are some that have, I know the Paraguayan group has a great podcast. So if you're looking for not necessarily skeptical but humanist groups in different countries, that was probably the best way to find them. And, sir?
A lot of the way people access the web is they do Google searches or something, and if we could flood the internet with articles that are that come up in Google searches that discredit things that we think should be discredited, that might be a very valuable way to combat these things and reach all over the world.
Yeah, that is very difficult because of the way that the algorithms work. You don't just have to flood the web, you have to get a lot of links to those sites, and if Google can tell that you're trying to manipulate it, they'll blacklist your site. But I mean, yes, generally having refutations of woo on the internet is a very good thing, and the more links there are, the better. So that's it. Thank you very much.